In the lesson today, we are going to graph linear equations in standard form. Not all equations are going to be given to us in slope-intercept form, and it's not always going to be beneficial for us to graph in slope-intercept form. So we're going to show an alternate way to graph our linear equations. Let's first talk about what standard form looks like. Standard form means that the x term and the y term are both on the same side. So now this looks like a whole lot of letters going on here, but the letters, the A, the B, and the C are going to be numbers in our equation. We're going to look at two different methods in order to graph them in standard form, and it really depends on what works for you and what is being asked of the equation on what method you are going to use. So we're going to use the same example in both of them. Let's do 4x minus 3y equals 6. And the first method to solving a equation in standard form is to solve for y and put it into slope-intercept form. Remember, slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b. And then we will be able to identify the slope and the y-intercept and graph like how we did in the last section. So let's take our example for x minus 3y equals 6. And we want to solve for y. So we need to get y by itself. Notice here is our y. We have a times by -3 and a 4x. So we want to move over that 4x. Again, like I said in the last video, way back in solving equations, we solve for y, and this is why we solved for y in order to be able to graph. Remember, the 6 and the 4x are not like terms, so we don't want to combine them together. Again, I like to put the x term first, but that's not a requirement as long as you remember that the slope is always with the x. And then I'm going to divide. Notice that I did keep that negative with the 3. I want to make sure that I don't lose that negative. So my -3's are going to cross off, and I'm going to get y equals, here I have a -4 divided by a -3, and that's going to make a positive. So I'm going to change it over to a positive 4/3. You want to leave the number that is in front of the x as an improper fraction. You always want to reduce if you can, but you want to leave that as improper fraction, so then we can do our rise over our run. Because if I change that into a decimal, it's not going to be as helpful for us, or a mixed number, it's not going to be as helpful. And then we have 6 divided by -3 gives us -2. Now I can, if I were to go graph it, I could identify the slope is 4/3, my y-intercept is 0, -2, and I can graph just like how I did in the last section. And we'll do an example where we continue on and we graph in a moment. Let's look at our second method. So we're going to look at the same exact equation, but this time we're going to find the x and the y-intercept. Remember, the x-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis, and the y-intercept is where it crosses the y-axis. So an x-intercept, y always equals 0, because you will have a point that'll be the x value, we'll just call it letter A, and then you'll have 0 for your y value every single time. To figure out where it crosses the x-axis, we just need to plug in 0 for y. And so that will eliminate the letter y and help us solve for x and figure out where it crosses the x-axis. So -3 times 0 is 0, and we are left with 4x equals 6. To keep solving for x, we'll divide by 4. This time we do want to figure out what it is as a mixed number to help us graph that point. So if I reduce it to 3/2, then I know it'd be 1 1/2. So my x-intercept is going to be 1.5, comma 0. Now let's find our y-intercept. So this time when we are finding a y-intercept, we are going to plug in 0 for x, because we're going to have the point 0b, where x equals 0. So we're going to go 4 times 0 minus 3y equals 6. And then my 4 times 0 goes away. Don't forget about the 3 being negative. Don't lose that. Divide by negative 3, and you get y equals negative 2. So the y-intercept is 0, negative 2. And then all you'll have to do is graph your intercepts and connect the dots, and that will help you make your graph. Let's look at another example where we're going to do the same process, but then we're going to graph it as well. If you're feeling pretty confident about either method 1 or method 2, go ahead and pause the video at any point in time so that you can try it out on your own and then continue on with us. So we are going to do method number 1 first, solving into slope-intercept form. That means I'm going to solve for y. I need to move my x term over first. It's a positive 3x. I will minus 3x to move it over to the other side. I get 5y equals negative 3x plus 15. I have a 5 times y, so I want to get rid of the times by 5. I will divide by 5 to get rid of that. And I get y equals, 5 doesn't go into 3, I leave it as a fraction, and then 15 divided by 5 is 3. So my slope is negative 3/5, and my y-intercept is 0, 3. Now I can easily graph that like how we did in the last section, and I'm going to go 0, 3 on the y-axis and make a point, and then I'll go down 3 and to the right 5 to make a second point. I can do that again, down 3 and to the right 5, make a third point. Don't forget, you also want to go back to that y-intercept and go the other direction as well. So I can go up 3 and to the left 5. And that'll continue on with my line. Connect my points. And there's my graph for 3x plus 5y equals 15. Now again, I'm going to do the same equation, but this time I'm going to do the second method where I find the x and the y intercepts. If I'm going to find the x-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for y. So you're plugging in 0 for the other letter that you are, trying to find. So if you're finding the x-intercept, you plug it in for y. If you're finding the y-intercept, you plug it in for x. The y goes away, and we get 3x equals 15. Divide by 3. X equals 5. So my x-intercept is 5, 0. And then I want to find my y-intercept. This time plugging in 0 for x. That goes away. Divide by 5. And I get y equals 3, so that point is 0, 3. You should notice already that we got the same y-intercept. It's not going to be any different, whatever method that we choose. And I'll make the point on the y-axis at 0, 3, and I will make the point on the x-axis at 5, 0, and then I will connect my points. So with this method, you only have 2 dots in order to connect. But that's okay. You can always extend your line out a little bit further to catch a little bit more of the graph. And notice these two graphs look identical. They are both going in the negative direction. They both cross at 3 on the y-axis and at 5 on the x-axis. In your question, it won't specifically say method 1 or method 2 because they're not really called that. Instead, it'll say something like state the x and the y intercepts if you need to, or your best choice would be method number 2. Remember, method number 1 was basically finding just the y-intercept and your slope. So it's hard to estimate what the x-intercept was sometimes on those graphs. So instead you want to do method number 2, so you have an exact answer for the x and the y-intercepts.